Hey everyone, today we're taking a chilling journey back in time to a dark and deadly era when Europe groaned under the weight of one of history's most terrifying pandemics, the Black Death. This was the bubonic plague that swept across the continent in the mid 14th century, claiming an estimated 75 to 200 million lives. That's roughly one-third to one-half of Europe's entire population. Many of us like to imagine we'd be resourceful survivors in such a crisis, but let's be brutally honest. Your chances would have been slim to none. And here's why. Episode 1. A complete lack of medical knowledge. Imagine a world without antibiotics, without any understanding of germs, without sterile instruments, and even without the basic hygiene we now take for granted. That was the reality of the 14th century. When the Black Death descended upon Europe, no one had any clue what was causing it. People latched onto the wildest and most diverse theories imaginable. Prevailing theories on the disease's cause, miasmas or bad air. This was by far the most pervasive theory. It was believed that diseases were transmitted through foul-smelling vapors emanating from decaying bodies, refuse, or swamps. Physicians famously donned their distinctive beaked masks, which were stuffed with aromatic herbs and spices. They believed these fragrant materials would filter the tainted air, and that pleasant smells could somehow ward off the disease. It sounds absurd to us now, but this was cutting-edge medical thought at the time. Imbalance of the four bodily humors. Dating back to ancient Greece, medical practice was heavily influenced by Hippocrates and Galen's theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was thought to arise from an imbalance of these fluids. Treatment often involved bloodletting or applying leeches to release excess bad blood or restore equilibrium. In practice, this only served to weaken an already struggling patient, making them even more vulnerable. Divine punishment. A significant portion of the population believed the plague was God's wrath, a divine punishment for humanity's sins. This led to widespread movements like the flagellants, who would publicly whip themselves in town squares, hoping to appease God. Ironically, these mass gatherings only facilitated the spread of the disease as infected and healthy individuals congregated in close proximity. Astrological influence. Some of the more intellectually inclined minds of the era speculated that the plague was caused by an unusual alignment of planets or the appearance of comets. While this seems more scientific than divine punishment, it was still a shot in the dark, lacking any real basis in microbiology. The stark reality. No one understood that the plague was transmitted by fleas living on rats and subsequently on humans. No one knew that basic sanitation and hygiene could save lives. Your odds of survival would have been virtually zero due to this profound absence of scientific knowledge regarding the disease's nature and transmission. Even if you were wealthy enough to afford the era's most esteemed physicians, their methods would have been not only ineffective, but often actively detrimental. Episode 2. Pervasive filth and non-existent hygiene. Now, picture a 14th century city. Forget about centralized water systems, sewers, or even trash collection. These were urban centers, yes, but they were also sprawling cesspits. Life in a medieval city, open sewers, and waste. The vast majority of waste, including human excrement, was simply tossed into the streets or flowed through open gutters. Rain might wash some of it away, but filth and stench were constant companions of urban life. Imagine walking through streets where waste mingled freely with mud and debris. Mountains of refuse, garbage heaps piled up directly outside homes, animal carcasses, food scraps. All these provided a veritable feast for rats. There were no organized waste disposal systems, so waste simply accumulated. Lack of personal hygiene. Regular bathing was a luxury, and often a rare one. Water was a precious commodity and often contaminated. People rarely changed their clothes, and washing laundry was an arduous, infrequent task. Fleas and lice were not just common, they were an assumed part of life for nearly everyone. Animals, everywhere. Domestic animals like chickens, pigs, and cats roamed freely through the streets. And then, of course, there were the rats. Black rats, Rattus rattus, lived in incredibly close proximity to humans, in homes, warehouses, and ports. These rats were the primary carriers of the fleas infected with the Yersinia pestis bacterium. In such conditions, plague-carrying fleas would have thrived everywhere. Avoiding their bites would have been virtually impossible, even if you, as an individual, attempted to maintain some level of personal hygiene. The surrounding environment would have constantly exposed you to the risk of infection. Think about how easily you could contract the disease simply by walking down a street or being in the same room as an infected person or a rat. The air itself might have felt oppressive with the threat of contagion. Episode 3. Overpopulation and the absence of effective quarantine. Medieval cities, while vibrant centers of trade and life, were incredibly overpopulated for their limited area. This density was a perfect breeding ground for disease. Conditions for rapid disease spread. Cramped living quarters. People lived in dense, multi-story dwellings. Large families often squeezed into a single room. This meant that close contact between individuals was not just inevitable, it was constant. If one person fell ill, the entire family and subsequently their neighbors were immediately at risk. There was no concept of personal space in the way we understand it today. Ineffective quarantine systems. The very concept of quarantine as we know it was only just beginning to emerge. Some cities made desperate attempts to isolate the sick, but these efforts were largely ineffective. Infected individuals continued to interact with healthy ones, spreading the disease further. There were horrifying instances of entire families being walled up in their homes, a desperate measure of last resort rather than an organized public health strategy. Mass migrations. When the plague began to rage in one city, people fled in a panic to other locations, believing they could escape its clutches. In reality, they inadvertently became super spreaders, carrying the plague along roads, rivers, and sea routes, accelerating the pandemic's reach. These migrations were a terrifying, yet understandable, human reaction to an unimaginable threat, unwittingly fueling the catastrophe. If you had been living in such a city, avoiding contact with infected people or their belongings would have been incredibly difficult. Even a simple trip outside could have become a death sentence. The plague spread with the speed of a wildfire, leaving you with virtually nowhere to hide. The sheer scale of interconnectedness, primitive by our standards, was enough to ensure widespread contagion. Episode 4. Social chaos and the breakdown of society. The plague wasn't just a disease, it was a force that ripped apart the very fabric of society, ushering in an era of unprecedented social chaos and psychological terror. consequences of social breakdown, collapse of authority and order. Governments and local authorities were utterly paralyzed. Laws ceased to function, and law enforcement, if it existed in any modern sense, was overwhelmed or succumbed to the disease itself. This led to a surge in crime, looting, and rampant anarchy. Trust evaporated. Abandonment of the sick. Families, gripped by fear for their own lives, abandoned their infected loved ones. The sick were often left to die alone in the streets or within their homes. It was a horrifying testament to the sheer terror the plague inspired, as the instinct for self-preservation overshadowed familial bonds. Decline in public morality. The omnipresent specter of death drove people to act in unpredictable ways. Some succumbed to hedonism, believing the end of the world was nigh, indulging in excesses. Others turned to extreme piety, seeking salvation. But broadly, the sense of communal solidarity crumbled, replaced by a desperate, every man for himself mentality. Economic collapse. Agriculture plummeted as laborers died in vast numbers. Trade routes ground to a halt. This led to severe food shortages and widespread famine, further weakening the population and making them even more susceptible to illness. Imagine trying to find food or work when the entire system of production and distribution had collapsed. Mass burials. Due to the sheer volume of deaths, there weren't enough people to properly bury the deceased. Bodies were often simply piled into massive plague pits, creating even more unsanitary conditions and potentially contributing to further infection. The sight of these pits, filled with nameless dead, must have been utterly traumatizing. Psychological trauma. The constant presence of death, the loss of nearly everyone you knew, and the utter helplessness against an unseen enemy would have inflicted unimaginable psychological trauma. Even if you survived the disease, the mental scars would have been profound and lifelong. In such a chaotic environment, even if you remained healthy, survival would have been incredibly difficult due to starvation, a complete lack of order, and the general disintegration of society. Access to food and clean water would have been disrupted, and banditry and looting would have become commonplace. The society you knew would have simply ceased to exist, replaced by a terrifying, lawless vacuum. Episode 5. Zero immunity and no modern medicine. And finally, perhaps the most critical point, our bodies today possess no natural immunity to the ancient and deadly strains that cause the Black Death. While plague still exists today in very rare cases, primarily in rural areas, it is effectively treated with modern antibiotics. Your body would be defenseless, no natural immunity, while our ancestors who survived the plague might have passed down some genes that offer a slight resistance, like the Delta 32 mutation in the CCR5 gene, which also provides resistance to HIV. This is negligible compared to the true protection derived from immunity developed over centuries of exposure. You would be facing a threat your immune system had absolutely no prior experience with. Your body simply wouldn't know how to fight it. No antibiotics. Today, bubonic plague, if detected early, is highly treatable with antibiotics such as streptomycin or gentamicin. In the 14th century, there were no antibiotics, no understanding of bacteria, and no concept of how to combat bacterial infections. The treatments available were futile at best and harmful at worst. Terrifying symptoms. Infection led to horrific symptoms: high fever, vomiting, and of course the infamous buboes, swollen, painful lymph nodes the size of an egg or an apple, most commonly appearing in the groin, armpits, or neck. These buboes often turn black due to hemorrhaging, hence the name Black Death. Without any treatment, death typically occurred within a matter of days, often agonizingly. High mortality rate. For those infected with bubonic plague during the Black Death, the mortality rate was estimated to be between 30% and 75% without treatment. For the more severe pneumonic plague, which attacked the lungs and could spread directly from person to person through coughing, the mortality rate was virtually 100%. If you contracted the disease, your chances of recovery were infinitesimally small. Without immunity and without modern medicine, your body would have been utterly defenseless against the onslaught of this deadly bacterium. Even if you were a young, robust individual, your chances of survival would have been incredibly slim. So, when we consider the Black Death, it's crucial to remember that it wasn't just a tough time. It was an era where mere survival was nothing short of a miracle. The mortality rate was so staggering that it fundamentally altered the course of history, profoundly impacting Europe's economy, religion, art, and social structure for centuries to come. Modern medicine, robust hygiene practices, and sophisticated sanitation systems are the profound blessings that protect us today from such catastrophes. They are the culmination of centuries of scientific progress and relentless battles against disease. Let's appreciate them. This pandemic serves as a grim and powerful reminder of the fragility of human life and the critical importance of scientific knowledge and collective effort in confronting global threats. It underscores how far we've come and why we must never take our advancements for granted. What do you think? Did you ever imagine yourself surviving in the Middle Ages? What other historical catastrophes fascinate you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next video.